Thanks for staying with us on The Real Story. Joining me right now in studio is Erick Russell. Russell, who won the Democratic primary to be the party's nominee for the state treasurer's office, says that he does not take the responsibility lightly. Born and raised in New Haven, Erick is a practicing attorney here in Connecticut in his firm's public and private finance group, and he's seen Connecticut's financial past and present. Now he's hoping to get your vote to shape the state's monetary future. Erick, thank you so much for being here in studio with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Jen.
Okay, so tell us about yourself. You grew up in New Haven.
I did. Yeah, so I grew up in New Haven. My father was a paratrooper in the Army and was stationed in Germany toward the tail end of his career, where he met my mother, who's originally from Germany. And they landed in New Haven, and with what little resources they had, started a small convenience store that I grew up working in a really tough area of the city. And that's really informed so much of what I've done since. I grew up with my parents really struggling to make ends meet, but working incredibly hard around neighbors who did the same thing, looking to provide better opportunities for themselves and their families. And that's really why I've had the opportunities. I've had my parents allowed me to be the first in my family to graduate from college and then law school.
Yep. And
since then, I've really been working to give back to the community that has given me so much.
Yeah, why go into finance?
So it didn't happen, it was a little bit more organic than that. I started in the legal field because I knew I wanted to do something to really help people.
Okay.
But I've always been interested in finance. I took tax courses in law school, and obviously starting in my family's small business, understand how important business and finance is to providing opportunity.
Sure.
And with the work that I do, it's really rewarding because it's ultimately about investing in the communities that we all live and work in.
Now, you've never run for office before, correct?
Correct.
But you were involved in the party,
yes.
In the Democratic Party.
Yes.
How long did you serve as you were the assistant?
Yep,
director?
so I was the vice chair of the state Democratic
yep.
Party for about 3.5 years. I stepped down when I decided to run.
Yep.
Through that capacity, was involved in the Democratic National Committee and the Association of State Democratic Committees. But really, my involvement in politics stemmed from wanting to contribute in a real way. When I was in college, I had kind of had my first real introduction to state politics when there was a bill up to abolish the death penalty in Connecticut.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And I had a professor, Mike Lawler, who was very involved. He was a state rep at the time and invited me up. And I realized that this is where decisions were being made that had huge impacts on so many communities.
Sure.
And wanted to get involved in that process. And so was involved in my local DTC, was involved in some campaigns and volunteering, was in Governor Malloy's general counsel's office for a little while I was in law school. And, you know, really this is a great opportunity for me to combine my professional experience with my lived experience and perspective to make sure that we're bringing change in our state, that we are keeping our state fiscally strong and making progress there, and that we are advocating for working families in our state.
Yeah, when you were looking at politics, were you like the treasurer's race, the treasurer's seat fits my work experience, or was there another office somewhere that you were looking at specifically?
I wasn't set on running for office at any point.
Okay.
I have been involved and have been contributing in many other ways without being elected, and have found that to be very rewarding.
Sure.
My professional career has been very rewarding as well. Again, representing municipalities and state agencies in the state of Connecticut in financing critical infrastructure, schools, housing, childcare facilities, But I have always said that if there were opportunities for me to make an impact,
sure.
That I wouldn't shy away from that. And I certainly think that this is a role that takes really qualified candidates. It takes real experience, but it also takes the perspective of someone who knows what families in our state are really going through. And I feel like I have that to bring to the table in many ways.
For taxpayers out there,
yes.
This race has kind of come into light a little bit more than it would, just because of inflation, because of high gas prices, obviously, the Fed's raising those interest rates to combat inflation. So when someone's looking at this office and deciding who to vote on, how is it going to impact them, and what can you do? Why should they vote for you?
Yeah, so what I would say to start is that we've made incredible progress over the last several years in our state in terms of stabling our fiscal condition. And if you look at the last 4 years alone under the leadership of Governor Lamont, 4 balanced budgets, a full rainy day fund upwards of $3 billion, nearly $6 billion paid down of our unfunded pension liability, which is saving taxpayers north of $450 million annually, and a historic tax cut targeted at providing relief to working families in our state. This is due to strong leadership. We have arrived in this situation because of decades and decades of not meeting our obligations, particularly around our pension fund payments. And we've seen how we can make that progress when we really prioritize this. I know on the other side, there have been a lot of proposals to drain our rainy day fund right now.
Sure, yeah.
And it would be devastating. The reality is that we are in our this position right now because of this really conscious effort, and I'm committed to continuing that moving forward. And I think that that's what voters should look at, is fiscally sound policy and decision-making, real experience in this role, again, having worked directly with the Treasurer's Office and having a unique insight into the role, working with state and local government very directly over the last decade, which is an important part of this role. And again, the perspective to make sure we are using this office to provide relief for working families, to improve our fiscal health long term, so that we are in a better place for our kids and grandkids when we look down the road.
I know some of your platform involves social responsibility and looking at how Connecticut is investing and what companies we're investing in. How much is that going to play into what you would do if you were in the seat?
Sure. And, social responsible investment, or ESG, has been something that's been around for quite some time now. And it's ultimately about minimizing risk as we are making investments. We should know that companies that we are investing in have sound practices when it comes to environmental issues and climate change, because as a long-term investor, that has potential to impact our return on investment down the road. And so those are all things that we will certainly continue to look at. But it's also a way to make sure that our values are aligned with how we're investing as well. And one example of that is to give Treasurer Wooden credit with our divestment from civilian gun manufacturers. There was the piece of this that it was ultimately about minimizing risk and knowing that it was the best decision for our portfolio.
Sure.
But it's also about understanding that as a state, this needs to be something we prioritize. We've been the leader across the country on common sense gun reform, but we also know the devastating impact that it has on our communities. And I know that personally, growing up in a community that was ravaged by gun violence.
Is there any other company or topic that you look at and you think that Connecticut should start pulling out of that we haven't yet?
So I think there's work being done on this, but we certainly need to look at how we are going to transition away from fossil fuels. That is a priority, one, because again, as a long-term investor, we know where the market is going on this issue. And I think that that's something I'm committed to, is analyzing where we are, where our investments currently sit as far as fossil fuels, and how we could transition out of that. And I think there's a host of other issues, making sure that companies we're doing business with have good practices when it comes to diversity and inclusion and labor practices, because all of these things ultimately impact the business's return.
Sure. Talk to me about our pension debt. We know we had your opponent on a couple segments ago, and I discussed it with him, so I want to get your take. I mean, our unfunded liabilities are significant. So we have an overflowing rainy day fund. We have our state coffers are full, but technically we have this massive debt. What role do you think the Treasurer's role could play in reducing that or helping reduce that?
It's a critical role, I mean, for many reasons, but I think it's important for us to first understand how we've arrived here.
Sure.
There's been about 7 decades of us not meeting our commitment with respect to funding our pensions. And so it is not something that we're going to be able to resolve overnight. What I will say is we've made incredible progress recently, again, under the leadership of Governor Lamont. Nearly $6 billion of that unfunded pension liability paid down. So we need a steady commitment to continue to prioritize paying down debt. And I would note that, again, any prospect of raiding our rainy day fund is ultimately going to impact how much money we are paying into our or paying down of our unfunded pension liability.
Sure.
But there's also about maximizing our return on investment, so the assets that we have there, maximizing returns, reducing fees, making sure that we are efficient. And so these are all things that I am absolutely committed to make sure that we get to a place where our pensions are more fully funded. This is really the crux of our financial condition as a state.
Sure.
And there's been, again, strides to do this. Even if you look at the Teachers Retirement Fund and the restructuring that was done in 2019, we are in a place now where we have a much more direct path to fully funding our pensions all the way around.
Than we did before.
Correct.
Talk to me about financial literacy, because it's something that you talk a lot about, and how I was being told, I was talking to my producer before, she was saying that she had read that your parents' store gave you kind of the passion to want to provide financial literacy to people. Explain that, and explain how you could contribute to people in your role. What the Treasurer's Office can do to help with financial literacy.
Yeah, I think financial literacy is so important. We talk a lot about education more generally, and frankly, financial literacy is something that everyone could utilize in their life, and I don't think that we have prioritized it enough. What I would like to do is to put together a working group and develop some curriculum so that we can partner with our local boards of education and implement financial literacy curriculum at an earlier age. So kids throughout school are learning how to manage their finances, knowing about interest, how to access capital and resources and make decisions as they're thinking about college and careers. And I think it would put a lot of people in a very different place as they move forward and make decisions heading into adulthood. My upbringing certainly had an impact, working in a small business, my parents knowing that every dollar mattered in terms of keeping the lights on and keeping our business open. And that's the perspective that I want to bring from a financial literacy standpoint, but also to this office, so that we are maximizing every taxpayer dollar to move our state forward.
It is interesting. I mean, I'm thinking even when I was growing up here in Connecticut, I was never taught any financial literacy aside from my parents, but there weren't specific classes, and it's such a skill set that you need right away when you become an adult, even before.
Certainly, and I think the other piece is, there are a lot of communities where if you don't have parents that have
Correct,
that
yeah.
financial wherewithal to begin with, that there aren't a lot of avenues for you to get that. And so I think really promoting financial literacy, making it more available to everyone, so that we have just a more informed citizenry in the state as a whole.
Sure, absolutely. Erick Russell, candidate for state treasurer. So good to have you in studio and to finally meet you.
Thank you. So nice to be here. Thank you.
All right, just a few segments ago, we did have Erick's GOP challenger on, State Representative Harry Aurora. You can find his interview on our website, on our app, and on streaming on Fox 61 Plus if you want to check that out. And beyond conversations with candidates, Fox 61 is the place to get your election coverage, with just 23 days to go until you hit the polls and you cast your ballot. Now, if you're not planning on voting in person, the launch of an online portal to apply for an absentee ballot might seem inconvenient, but Republican lawmakers aren't too happy about it. They say it's ill-timed. Fox 61's political reporter Emma Wolforest has more on why. Emma.
Jen, last week, the Secretary of the State's office launched a new web portal for Connecticut voters to request an absentee ballot online, but it's already receiving backlash. Legislative minority leaders say they have major concerns, claiming this will inject chaos into the election system just weeks before November 8th. While Connecticut does not have no excuse absentee ballot voting, the legislature did expand eligibility this past session to include those unable to go to their polling place due to sickness, a disability, or being out of town. And now those falling within the qualifications can apply for their absentee ballot via this online portal. But Republican legislators say this launch is ill-timed and sent this letter to the Secretary's office asking for a meeting or public hearing immediately. They say while they do support moving to an online system, they wish this was rolled out earlier. Their biggest concern is fraud.
It's about access and security, and that's where I think that this system is really taking both things into account and making sure that everybody feels comfortable moving forward.
We're going to be faced with reacting to it after the fact. I think it's going to mislead voters and disenfranchise them if they try to get them.
State officials say absentee ballots can be requested up until the day before the election, but add it will take a few days to process those online applications, and ballots then need to be mailed to voters. So if voters are requesting an absentee ballot close to the election, the state recommends requesting one in person with a town clerk, but they didn't give any specific numbers or dates. No word yet if minority leadership will get their requested meeting. Jen?
All right, Emma, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well, we are just a few weeks out from November 8th. For all of your up-to-date election coverage and the Fox 61 voter guide, you can head to fox61.com or download the Fox 61 News app. And you can find all of our past interviews with candidates and election officials on the Real Story page online and on the app. Or watch The Real Story right here on air on Fox 61 or streaming on Fox 61 Plus every Sunday at 10 a.m. Have a great morning.